Hello everyone, Alkanandamar here, human rights activist and former NHS doctor. So with what's been going on this week, it's time to revisit a post I wrote for the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, starting with a quote from the preamble. Whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Whereas disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind, and the advent of a world in which human beings shall enjoy freedom of speech and belief, and freedom from fear and want, has been proclaimed as the highest aspiration of the common people. Whereas it is essential, if man is not to be compelled to have recourse, as a last resort, to rebellion against tyranny and oppression, that human rights should be protected by the rule of law. So 2018 saw the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Born of the horrors of 2 world wars and the Holocaust, the Declaration embodies humanity's determination to start anew, to say never again to the horrors of the first half of the 20th century. Its 30 terse articles encapsulate thousands of years of aspiration for a better world, one of peace, justice, and liberty. Within it we glimpse the vision of the Hebrew prophets for a world where justice shall run down as waters and righteousness as a mighty stream, a world of peace where the lion shall lie down with the lamb. In it we see the aspirations of the edicts of Ashoka, proclamations of peace, freedom of religion, universal health care, and an independent and impartial judiciary set up on stone pillars across India's Mauryan Empire. We see the social vision of Jesus, who lived a life of solidarity with the poor and oppressed, and of Muhammad, who advocated for the right to education, religious freedom, and racial equality. Quote, a white person has no superiority over a black person, nor does a black person over a white one, except by piety and good action. The Declaration crystallizes the secular motto of the French Enlightenment, liberté, égalité, fraternité, and draws inspiration from the Constitution of the United States. It accords with indigenous wisdom as well, such as the great law of peace of the Iroquois Confederacy. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was born of the horrors of war. So too was one of its earliest predecessors, the Pillars of Ashoka. The ancient world in which Ashoka lived was one where might was right and tyrants held sway. Siege and starvation were standard tactics of warfare, slavery was normalized, and civilians had no protection. Ashoka himself exemplified this cruelty when his army killed 100,000 Kalingan warriors in a war of conquest and drove 150,000 innocent civilians from their homes. His horror and revulsion at what he had done, and his embrace of the nascent Buddha Dharma drove him to envision a world of justice and peace. 2,000 years ago, according to the Gospel of Luke, angels announced the dawn of this new world of peace and goodwill. But as the carol by Edmund Sears says, Yet with the woes of sin and strife, the world has suffered long. Beneath the angels' train have rolled 2,000 years of wrong, and man at war with man hears not the love song which they bring. Oh, hush the noise, ye men of strife, and hear the angels sing. The Proclamation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights sought to bring an end to the disregard and contempt for human rights that have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind. Yet in the past 70 years, barbarous acts have continued, and the nations of the world have remained truer to financial markets and the arms trade than to the ancient human aspiration for peace and justice. Dictators, today's equivalent of the ancient tyrants, have been operating from the same playbook, gunning down, imprisoning, torturing, and killing peaceful protesters, bloggers, and journalists, and forcibly displacing entire regions. Impunity for one tyrant emboldens the rest. So 2018 was the year when Sadananda and I decided to take matters into our own hands. The situation in Syria, then in its 7th year, was wringing our hearts every day as the worst man-made cataclysm of our lifetimes. If never again doesn't really mean never again, then my relatives died in vain in Auschwitz. If governments couldn't protect human rights, we, as members of the common people of the world, would have to do so on our own. This mood of mingled desperation and determination led us to start Boulder's Interfaith initiative for human rights in Syria, which takes a contemplative approach to human rights, focused on Syria, but including related causes such as Palestinian rights, the treatment of immigrants at the US-Mexico border, and the suffering of children in Yemen. We have forged new friendships around the world, both with people inside Syria and in refugee camps, and with friends both in the US and in Ireland, the UK, Italy, and Spain who care passionately about human rights in Syria. Many of these doors were opened for us by our friend Dr. Nada Hashemi, director of the Center for Middle East Studies at DU, who was kind enough to come and give a talk at Alandi Ashram. And he poignantly told us that if we had a similar meeting about human rights inside Syria, we would all be arrested and many of us would be tortured. Dear friends, tyranny breeds tyranny. If peaceful protesters can be gunned down in Syria, Nicaragua, and Sudan, it is only a matter of time before we too lose our freedom of assembly. If Khashoggi, a Washington Post columnist, can be murdered and dismembered in his own consulate, and Raif Badawi can be flogged and imprisoned for blogging, it is only a matter of time until freedom of speech is dead for all of us. 70, and now more than 70 years on from the promulgation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, this is not the time to sit back complacently, trusting that liberal democracy will survive without our efforts. Today, more than ever, all of us need to stand up to protect the greatest achievement of thousands of years of aspiration for peace and justice, the basis of today's international humanitarian law. the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The advent of a world in which human beings shall enjoy freedom of speech and belief, and freedom from fear and want, has been proclaimed as the highest aspiration of the common people. And it is up to us, the people of the world, particularly those of us fortunate enough still to enjoy free speech and free assembly, to work every day to make this aspiration a reality. Today, this also means stand up for Ukraine and pray for Ukraine, because Ukraine today is standing up for all that we believe in. Thank you.
Wow.